The gallows stood stark against the pale morning sky, casting a long shadow across the dusty town square of Fort Harmon. A crowd had gathered, their faces hard as the Montana winter that threatened on the horizon. They'd come to watch justice, or what passed for it on the frontier. Mason Reed stood with his hands bound behind his back, the rough hemp of the noose scratching at his neck. The murmurs of the crowd washed over him like a toxic tide. Traitor. Coward. Let him hang. Sheriff Dawkins read the charges with practiced indifference. Mason Reed, former Army scout, you have been found guilty of dereliction of duty and the abandonment of your unit, resulting in the deaths of 8 soldiers of the United States Army. For this crime, you are sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Reed's jaw clenched. 3 years he'd carried the weight of those deaths, but he hadn't abandoned anyone. He'd been the only one who tried to save them. Have you any last words before the sentence is carried out? Reed lifted his gaze to the mountains that loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. I didn't betray them, he said, his voice steady. But someone did. A woman spat in the dirt. Liar! The sheriff nodded to the executioner, who took position by the lever. Reed drew a deep breath, perhaps his last, and closed his eyes. The thunder of hoofbeats broke the grim silence. A rider appeared at the edge of the square, waving a paper sealed with an official stamp. Hold, the rider shouted. Hold the execution. Sheriff Dawkins raised his hand, and the executioner stepped back from the lever. The rider dismounted and strode forward, handing the sealed document to the sheriff. From Judge Morrison of the Federal Circuit Court, a stay of execution. A wave of anger rippled through the onlookers. The sheriff broke the seal and read the document, his expression souring with each line. By order of Federal Judge Morrison, the execution of Mason Reed is hereby stayed. His voice held no satisfaction. The prisoner is to be released, with the condition that he leave the territory within 30 days. The crowd erupted in shouts of protest. The sheriff gestured to his deputy, who reluctantly climbed the steps to remove the noose. This ain't justice, a man shouted, his face red with fury. He sent 8 good men to their deaths. The judge's order stands, the sheriff replied, though his tone suggested he shared the sentiment. He turned to Reed, lowering his voice. You've got 30 days, Reed. After that, I can't guarantee your safety, judge's orders or not. As the deputy cut his bonds, Reed rubbed his wrists. The crowd's anger was palpable, a living thing that threatened to consume him where he stood. He's a coward, a woman cried out, her voice breaking with emotion. My boy trusted you, Reed. Reed recognized her, Mrs. Callahan, mother to James Callahan, the youngest member of his unit, just 19 when he died. The accusation cut deeper than any blade ever could. The small room above the saloon was Reed's temporary sanctuary. He sat on the edge of the bed, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. On the floor in front of him lay the contents of his pockets, a folded map of the territory, a worn compass, a hunting knife, and 12 silver dollars, all that remained of his worldly possessions after paying the lawyer who'd secured the stay of execution. $12 to make a new life, or at least to survive long enough to find one. He picked up the coins, their weight familiar in his palm. The lamplight caught the silver, making them gleam despite their tarnish. He remembered his father's words from long ago. The value of a man isn't measured by how much money he has, son, but by what he does with it. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Reed tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife. It's open, he called, readying himself for trouble. The door creaked open to reveal not an angry townsperson, but the lawyer who'd saved his life. Howard Phelps, a thin man with spectacles and a perpetually concerned expression. Mr. Reed, Phelps said, closing the door, the stay of execution is temporary. The judge didn't overturn the verdict. He simply found the proceedings irregular enough to warrant a review. Meaning? Meaning if you're still in the territory when he arrives for the winter circuit, you'll likely face a new trial. And while I might secure you better treatment, the outcome, he trailed off, the implication clear. Reed nodded slowly. So I have 30 days to disappear? Essentially, yes, and I would strongly advise using them. The sentiment against you here is profound. I need to cross the northern pass before the snow makes it impassable. Phelps looked alarmed. That's cutting it close. The first serious storms could hit any day now. I know, but I don't have much choice. South and east, they'll be waiting for me. West is Blackfoot territory. North then, Phelps agreed reluctantly. But you'll need supplies, a horse at minimum. Reed laughed without humor. For $12, I'll be lucky to get a mule with 3 legs. After the lawyer left, Reed returned to the window, looking at the narrow slice of sky visible between the buildings. Dusk was falling, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere beyond those mountains lay whatever future he might salvage from the wreckage of his life. The trading post at Bear Creek stood at the edge of civilization, the last outpost before the wilderness truly began. Reed arrived as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the muddy yard. His journey from Fort Harmon had been cautious, keeping to less traveled paths, sleeping rough, and avoiding any signs of human habitation. He tied his borrowed mule, an ancient, ornery beast he'd rented with 2 of his precious dollars, to the hitching post and surveyed the trading post. A main building served as store and tavern combined. Behind it, a corral held several horses of varying quality. Reed's attention fixed on the corral. He needed a horse, a good one, to have any chance of crossing the pass before winter set in. With $10 remaining, his prospects weren't promising. The door to the main building opened, and a figure emerged onto the porch. An old man with skin like tan leather and eyes that had seen too much of the frontier's harsh reality. He wore buckskins in the style of the mountain men, though the beaded patterns suggested long association with one of the native tribes. "Don't get many visitors this late in the season," the man called out. Reed approached the porch, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Just passing through." "Most folks passing through are running from something." "Or to something," Reed countered. A faint smile creased the man's face. "True enough. Name's Hollister. This is my place." "Reed, Mason Reed." Hollister's eyes narrowed slightly at the name, but he made no comment. Instead, he gestured toward the corral. "Looking for a horse. That mule won't get you far if you're heading north." "I am, and yes, I need a horse, something strong, used to mountain trails." "Got a few that might suit," Hollister said, "but they don't come cheap this time of year." Reed followed the trader to the corral, his hopes falling as he assessed the animals. Most were older stock, past their prime, or bearing the marks of hard use. "The bay gelding is $30, Hollister said, pointing to a sturdy horse with intelligent eyes. "The paint mare beside him is $25. Reed didn't bother to hide his disappointment. "I've got 10, plus this mule if he's worth anything to you." Hollister laughed without malice. "That mule isn't worth the feed he'll eat tonight. $10 won't get you much here, friend." Before Reed could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. A small party was approaching from the east. 3 riders. As they drew closer, Reed noticed that they were Native Americans, 2 men and a woman. Hollister straightened beside him. "Walking Bear," he murmured, "chief of what's left of the Shoshone band that lives in these parts." Reed studied the approaching riders. The leader was an older man whose straight posture and steady gaze spoke of natural authority. Beside him rode a younger man with the watchful eyes of a warrior. The woman was harder to read, her face partially obscured by the folds of a blanket against the chill. Walking Bear raised a hand in greeting as they entered the yard, speaking in heavily accented but clear English. "Hollister, my friend, the winter comes early this year." "So it seems," Hollister replied. "What brings you down from the mountains?" "Trade," Walking Bear said simply, dismounting, "and news." As the chief approached, Reed noticed that his gaze had fixed not on Hollister, but on him, a penetrating look that seemed to strip away pretense. "This is Reed," Hollister said by way of introduction. "Just passing through." Walking Bear inclined his head slightly, still studying Reed. "I know this man," he said at last. "The soldier they wish to hang." Reed tensed, his hand instinctively moving closer to his knife. News traveled fast on the frontier, but he hadn't expected his reputation to precede him this far. "You're mistaken," he said, keeping his voice even. "I am not," Walking Bear replied with absolute certainty. 3 summers ago, you led the soldiers who came to speak with my people about the new boundaries. You were fair when others were not, and now they call you traitor." Reed felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He remembered that meeting, a tense negotiation that had nearly ended in bloodshed until cooler heads prevailed. Walking Bear had been among those counseling peace. "The world is full of ironies," Reed said carefully. Walking Bear smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "Indeed it is." He turned to Hollister. "We will trade now, and then I would speak with this man alone." The next hour passed in the familiar rhythm of frontier commerce. Reed watched from the porch, nursing a cup of bitter coffee Hollister had offered. His mind churned with possibilities, none of them particularly promising. If his identity was known even here, how far would he have to go to escape his past? As the trading concluded, Walking Bear approached the porch, settling beside Reed with the unhurried manner of one who has important matters to discuss. "You seek to cross the northern pass," the chief said. It wasn't a question. Reed nodded. "Before the snow makes it impossible. It is already dangerous. In 2 weeks it will be deadly." "I don't have much choice," Reed admitted. "I need to be beyond the territory's reach." Walking Bear was silent for a moment, his gaze directed toward the mountains. "A man hunted is a man who must decide what he will sacrifice to survive, and what he will not." The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Reed had been wrestling with exactly that question since the moment the noose had been removed from his neck. "I won't sacrifice my innocence," Reed said finally. "I didn't betray my men." "I believe you," Walking Bear said simply. "A traitor's eyes do not look as yours do." The unexpected vote of confidence caught Reed off guard. He'd grown so accustomed to suspicion and condemnation that trust, even from a stranger, felt almost foreign. "You need a horse," Walking Bear continued, "a strong one who knows the mountain paths." Reed gave a humorless laugh. "What I need and what I can afford are very different things." Walking Bear studied him intently. "How much do you have?" $10, plus a mule that's more stubborn than useful." The chief nodded thoughtfully. "I have a mare, young but sure-footed in the mountains. Her mother came from the Spanish lands far south, her father from the Mustangs that run wild in the valleys beyond the pass." Reed's interest was piqued despite his skepticism. "Hollister's horses start at $25. "Hollister is a trader," Walking Bear said with a slight smile. "I am a chief who sees what must be." "And what would you ask for this mare?" Walking Bear held out his hand. $12 silver. Reed blinked in surprise. "I just told you I have 10. "You have 2 more somewhere," the chief said with certainty, "the money you kept separate for emergencies." The observation was eerily accurate. Reed did indeed have 2 additional silver dollars sewn into the lining of his coat, a final reserve he'd planned to use only in the direst circumstances. "Why would you sell me a good horse for less than half what it's worth?" Reed asked, suspicion coloring his tone. Walking Bear's expression became solemn. "Sometimes the fate of many rests in the hands of those society is cast aside." The cryptic statement did nothing to ease Reed's wariness. "That's not an answer." "It is the only answer I can give you now," the chief replied. $12 for a horse that will carry you safely through the pass. Do we have a trade?" Every instinct in Reed's body screamed that there was more to this offer than appeared on the surface. In his experience, deals that seemed too good to be true invariably were. And yet, without a horse, his chances of survival were slim to none. "I want to see this mare first," he said cautiously. Walking Bear nodded and stood. "Of course." The chief led Reed to where the younger man held the reins of 3 horses. 2 were typical of native mounts, smaller, sturdy ponies, but the third was something else entirely. A sleek mare with a deep chest and powerful shoulders. Her coat a rich chestnut that gleamed in the late afternoon light. She held her head high, alert but not nervous, with the confident stance of an animal that knew its own strength. Even to Reed's experienced eye, she was easily worth $50, perhaps more. "This is Mawa," Walking Bear said. "It means she who travels far." Reed approached carefully, extending his hand for the mare to catch his scent. She sniffed his palm, then nudged it gently, her dark eyes regarding him with what seemed like curiosity. "She's magnificent," Reed admitted. "Why would you part with her for $12? Walking Bear exchanged glances with his companions. The woman had moved closer, her blanket now lowered to reveal a face both beautiful and grave, with eyes that held the same penetrating quality as the chief's. The horse comes with everything needed for your journey, Walking Bear said cryptically. Reed stroked the mare's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath her coat. With a mount like this, crossing the pass before the worst of winter set in was a real possibility. Still, the chief's odd manner and enigmatic statements set warning bells ringing in his mind. There's something you're not telling me, Reed said. Walking Bear smiled faintly. There are many things I am not telling you, Mason Reed, but the mare is yours for 12 silver dollars. That is the trade I offer. Reed hesitated, caught between suspicion and necessity. In the end, necessity won out. He reached into his pocket for the $10, then carefully cut the hidden stitches in his coat lining to retrieve the final 2 coins. $12, he said, holding out the silver, for the mare and whatever else is needed for my journey. Walking Bear accepted the money with solemn dignity. The trade is made. He handed Reed the reins. You leave at first light tomorrow? That's the plan. The chief nodded. Good. Mawa knows the trails. Trust her when your own judgment falters. With that, Walking Bear turned to his companions and spoke quietly in their native tongue. The younger man looked troubled, casting a glance at Reed that bordered on hostility. The woman's expression remained unreadable, though something in her eyes, a deep sadness perhaps, caught Reed's attention. Safe travels, Mason Reed, Walking Bear said, mounting his own horse. Remember my words when the time comes. The fate of many may rest in your hands. Before Reed could press for clarification, the 3 riders departed, heading west toward the setting sun. He watched them go, the sense of having stepped into something larger and more complex than a simple horse trade settling uncomfortably over him. Hollister appeared at his side, eyeing Mawa with undisguised admiration and surprise. Walking Bear sold you that mare? For how much? $12, Reed admitted. The trader let out a low whistle. Either he's losing his mind, or there's something about this I don't understand. Reed ran a hand along the mare's flank, feeling the quality of the animal he had acquired. That makes 2 of us. The campsite Reed selected was set back from the main trail, nestled in a small grove of pines that provided both shelter from the wind and concealment from casual observation. He built a small fire, just enough to cook a simple meal and provide some warmth against the deepening chill of the mountain night. Mawa grazed peacefully nearby, seemingly content with her new owner. As he finished his coffee, Reed studied the map he'd spread beside the fire. The northern pass loomed ahead, none, a treacherous route through the mountains that was challenging in the best conditions and deadly in the worst. Early snowfall had already dusted the higher elevations, a warning of the winter to come. If he pushed hard, he might cross the pass in 4 days, 5 at most. After that, he'd be beyond the territorial jurisdiction, free to build whatever new life he could with nothing but his skills and the clothes on his back. He refolded the map and leaned back against his saddle, gazing up at the stars visible through breaks in the pine branches. They were the same stars he'd navigated by as an Army scout, the same stars that had watched over the night his unit was ambushed. The night everything changed. Reed closed his eyes, but the memories came unbidden. The crack of rifles in the darkness, the screams of wounded men, the desperate scramble for cover as Blackfoot warriors materialized from the shadows. 8 soldiers dead by morning. Only 2 survivors, Reed himself and Lieutenant Turner, who'd been separated from the unit during the initial attack. It was Turner who'd first suggested Reed had abandoned his post. Turner, whose testimony had sealed Reed's fate in the eyes of the Army and the community. And yet, Reed had seen something in the lieutenant's eyes during the court-martial. A flicker of something that wasn't quite guilt, but wasn't innocence either. There was more to that night than a simple ambush. Reed had felt it then, and 3 years of turning the events over in his mind had only strengthened that conviction. But proof eluded him, and without it, he was just a disgraced scout with a story no one believed. The snap of a twig brought Reed instantly alert, his hand moving to the rifle beside him. He remained motionless, listening intently as his eyes scanned the darkness beyond the firelight. Another sound, the soft scuff of a boot against stone. Not an animal. I know you're there, Reed called out, his voice steady. Show yourself. Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then movement at the edge of the firelight. 2 figures emerged from the shadows, standing side by side with the stillness of deer poised for flight. Women, Two native women, one perhaps in her mid-20s, the other younger, barely more than a girl. Reed recognized the older one immediately as the woman who had accompanied Walking Bear. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, not lowering his rifle. The older woman's gaze flicked to the weapon, but she showed no fear. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and spoke in the same heavily accented English as Walking Bear. "Walking Bear sent us," she said. "Part of arrangement." Reed felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. The chief's cryptic words about the horse coming with everything needed for your journey suddenly took on new and unwelcome meaning. "What arrangement?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "You paid $12, the woman said, as if this explained everything. "For the horse and for us." Reed slowly lowered his rifle, shock giving way to disbelief and then anger. "I didn't agree to this. Whatever Walking Bear thinks, I'm not—" "He is not selling us," the woman interrupted, her tone sharp as a blade. "You do not understand." "Then explain it to me." The woman studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. "You leave at first light tomorrow. That was the plan." "Yes." "Then we go with you 3 days." She paused, her jaw tightening. "After that, we separate, or we all die here." The flat certainty in her voice sent a warning through every nerve in Reed's body. This wasn't about commerce or cultural differences. This was about survival. "Who's coming?" Reed asked quietly. The younger woman finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who does not take no for an answer." Reed looked between them, then toward the tree line. The firelight cast dancing shadows among the pines, peaceful and unthreatening. But he could feel it now, the weight of unseen eyes, the sense that this clearing, this moment, was the calm before something violent crashed through. He thought about his $12, about the horse, about the fact that he was alone miles from anywhere with two women who'd been sent to him like a desperate gamble. He could refuse, send them back, keep to his own plan. But the look in the older woman's eyes told him everything he needed to know. If he did that, he'd be sending them to their deaths. And whoever was hunting them would probably come for him next anyway, just for being a witness to whatever this was. 3 days, Reed said finally. "Then you tell me everything, and I mean everything." The older woman nodded once, relief flickering across her face so quickly he almost missed it. 3 days. Reed gestured toward the fire. "Sit. You might as well get warm." As they settled by the fire, Reed studied the two women more carefully. The older one moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to hardship and responsibility. The younger appeared more tentative, staying close to her companion, her eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "What do I call you?" Reed asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "I am Elena," the older woman replied. "This is my sister, Sarah." Reed nodded. "Mason Reed." "We know who you are," Elena said. "The soldier they tried to hang." The blunt acknowledgement shouldn't have surprised him, given Walking Bear's recognition, but it still set Reed's teeth on edge. "Seems my reputation gets around." "Our father knows many things about many people," Elena said. "He says you were betrayed." Reed's attention sharpened. "What else does he say?" "That you are a man who keeps his word." Elena's gaze held his steadily. "Even when it cost him everything." There was something in her tone, a challenge perhaps, or a test, that made Reed wonder exactly how much Walking Bear knew about him, and how much he had gambled on that knowledge being accurate. "Your father has a strange way of asking for help," Reed observed. A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips. "He does what he must." Reed wanted to press further, to demand the full story behind this unexpected complication to his plans. But the wariness in both women's postures suggested that pushing too hard now would yield little. 3 days, he reminded himself. He'd get his answers then. "Get some sleep," he said instead, gesturing to the extra blanket rolled beside his pack. "I'll keep watch." Elena hesitated, then reached for the blanket, dividing it between herself and her sister. "We will leave at first light." "First light," Reed confirmed, "and we'll move fast." As the sisters settled across the fire from him, Reed felt the weight of the decision he'd just made. His carefully constructed plan for escape had just become infinitely more complicated. Now he wasn't just responsible for his own survival, but for these two women as well. And whatever or whoever was pursuing them. He checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded and ready. The familiar routine calmed his mind, focusing his thoughts on the immediate concern of keeping them all alive until morning. As the night deepened, Reed caught movement in the trees behind them. Just a shadow, just a flicker of something that shouldn't have been there. He didn't mention it to the women. Didn't need to. Elena had already seen it. Her hand moved to something hidden beneath her blanket, and her eyes met Reed's with a silent message. They were already being followed, and time had just run out. The dawn broke clear and cold, the first rays of sunlight painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and rose. Reed had allowed himself only brief moments of rest during the night, always keeping one ear attuned to the sounds of the forest. The shadowy watcher had not revealed itself again, but Reed had felt its presence, a constant, patient observation that set his nerves on edge. They broke camp quickly, the sisters moving with practiced efficiency that spoke of lives spent in constant readiness to flee. Reed noticed how Elena kept her sister close, her watchful gaze constantly scanning their surroundings, while Sarah remained silent, her movements quick but careful. "We should avoid the main trail," Reed said, securing his pack to Mawa's saddle. "Whoever's watching us will expect us to take the direct route toward the pass." Elena nodded in agreement. "There is another way, longer but less exposed, through the eastern ravines." Reed raised an eyebrow. "You know the terrain well." "This has been our home for many generations," Elena replied, "before the white men came with their maps and boundaries." "The ravines it is," Reed decided, "but we have one problem. Mawa is strong, but she can't carry all three of us." Elena glanced at her sister, then back to Reed. "We can alternate, walking when the ground allows, riding when we need speed." Reed nodded and mounted the mare, extending his hand to help Sarah up behind him. The younger woman hesitated, looking to her sister for guidance. Elena gave her a reassuring nod, and Sarah accepted Reed's hand, settling awkwardly behind him. Elena shouldered a small pack containing their few possessions and moved to the front. "This way." They traveled in tense silence, moving deeper into the wilderness with each passing hour. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing them to slow their pace as they navigated rocky slopes and dense underbrush. Reed kept his senses alert, watching for any sign of pursuit while simultaneously assessing the path ahead. By midday, they had reached the first of the eastern ravines, a narrow cut through the mountains where a seasonal creek had carved a path over countless centuries. The walls rose steep on either side, providing both protection from observation and the risk of being trapped if discovered. "How far until we reach safer ground?" Reed asked, keeping his voice low despite the isolation. 3 miles, perhaps 4, Elena replied. "Then we climb to the ridge. From there we can see anyone approaching." As they progressed, Reed found himself falling into the familiar rhythms of his scout training. His eyes caught details others might miss. A fresh scrape on a rock where a boot had slipped, a broken twig where someone had passed recently, the faint but unmistakable scent of tobacco on the breeze. They weren't alone in these mountains, and whoever was following knew exactly where they were heading. An hour into their journey, the ravine began to widen, the walls gradually sloping down to meet a broader valley. Reed raised his hand, signaling a halt. He crouched, studying the ground ahead with careful attention. "What is it?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed pointed to a patch of disturbed earth. "Horsemen passed here recently." He looked up at the ridge line above them. "And they're not trying to hide their tracks anymore." Elena followed his gaze, her expression grim. "They know we have seen the warning." "They're hurting us," Reed realized, "pushing us towards somewhere they can trap us." They altered their course, angling toward a dense stand of pine trees that climbed the northern slope of the valley. Reed remained on foot, scanning constantly for any sign of movement on the ridges above. As they reached the edge of the pine forest, Reed caught movement from the corner of his eye, a flash of something on the eastern ridge, quickly gone. He signaled for Elena and Sarah to continue into the trees while he paused, rifle ready, watching. Nothing moved for several long seconds. Then, unmistakably, the silhouette of a rider appeared against the sky, paused briefly at the ridge crest, and then withdrew. They had been seen. Reed hurried to catch up with the sisters, finding them waiting just within the shelter of the pines. "One rider on the ridge," he reported, "watching us." Elena's face tightened with fear, but her voice remained steady. "Just one?" That I saw, Reed confirmed. But if they're smart, and it seems they are, they'll have split up to cover more ground. They continued climbing through the increasingly dense forest, choosing their path carefully to minimize signs of their passing. The climb was arduous, made more challenging by the need for stealth and the constantly shifting terrain. Reed called a brief halt in a small clearing, allowing them to catch their breath and take stock of their position. From this vantage point, they could see much of the valley below and the ridgeline opposite. "How much further to shelter?" he asked, turning to Elena. She pointed to where the tree line thinned near the top of the ridge. "There is an abandoned mining camp just beyond that. Stone walls, easily defended." "Or easily trapped," Reed pointed out. "There is another way," Sarah spoke up unexpectedly. "A small tunnel the children used to play in. It leads from the back of the camp to a ledge overlooking the next valley." Reed filed this information away, grateful for the potential escape route. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As they neared the ridge top, Reed moved ahead alone to scout the area. The mining camp was just visible beyond, a collection of stone walls and collapsed wooden structures nestled in a natural depression. It was as Elena had described, with a single obvious entrance through a narrow gap in the rocky perimeter. That's when he saw them. Three riders moving swiftly along the valley floor, heading directly toward the base of the slope they had just climbed. And they weren't following Reed's group. They were paralleling their path, racing to reach the mining camp first. Reed hurried back to where Elena and Sarah waited, his expression grim. "We need to move. Now they're trying to cut us off at the camp." They hurried forward, sacrificing stealth for speed. As they emerged from the tree line, the mining camp lay directly ahead, perhaps 200 yards across open ground. They were halfway to the camp entrance when the first shot rang out, the crack of a rifle echoing across the ridge. The bullet struck a rock near Reed's feet, sending fragments of stone flying. "Run!" Reed shouted, pushing Elena and Sarah toward the camp entrance, while he swung up onto Mawa's back. The women sprinted forward as another shot rang out, this one closer. Reed wheeled the mare around, rifle ready, searching for the shooter. He fired, not aiming to kill, but to force the shooter to keep his head down. Then he spurred Mawa after Elena and Sarah, who had nearly reached the relative safety of the camp walls. They reached the narrow entrance just as Elena and Sarah ducked through. Then Reed dismounted in one fluid motion, leading the mare inside before their pursuers could get a clear shot. The abandoned mining camp was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a rough circle of stone walls enclosing what had once been several wooden structures. In the center stood a more substantial building, its stone walls still intact though its roof had partially fallen in. "Get to the main building," Reed directed, leading Mawa toward the shelter of the nearest wall. "Stay low and keep moving." They reached the main building and ducked inside, momentarily safe from both observation and gunfire. Reed tied Mawa to a beam, then moved to the doorway to keep watch. "Sarah," he said over his shoulder, "where's this tunnel you mentioned?" The younger woman moved to the back of the building, searching along the stone foundation. "Here," she said after a moment, pulling aside a fallen timber to reveal a dark opening barely large enough for an adult to crawl through. Reed joined her, examining the tunnel entrance. It was rough-hewn, clearly not part of the original mining operation, but added later. He couldn't see far into the darkness, but a faint breath of air suggested it did indeed open elsewhere. He was interrupted by a voice calling from outside, its tone conversational despite the circumstances. "I know you're in there, Reed. Come on out and let's talk like civilized men." Reed tensed, the voice striking a chord of recognition. He moved back to the doorway, staying within the shadows as he peered out. Three men had taken positions around the camp entrance, their rifles ready but not currently aimed at the building. The one who had spoken stood slightly ahead of the others, a tall figure in a worn cavalry coat, his stance casual but alert. Reed felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. He knew that voice, knew it all too well. "Lieutenant Turner," he murmured. "Son of a bitch." Elena appeared beside him, her face paling as she recognized the name. "Turner? The man from your unit?" Reed nodded grimly. "The very same. And now I'm starting to understand why your father chose me for this particular task." The voice called out again. "Come now, Reed. You're outmanned and outgunned. But this doesn't have to end badly. All we want are the girls. You can ride away, free and clear." Reed turned to Elena, his expression hardening. 3 days, you said. Then you'd tell me every minute. I think that timeline just got moved up. Elena held his gaze, conflict evident in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. The man out there, Turner, he works for Maxwell Blackwood now, she said, her voice low and urgent. A former general who owns half the territory. He wants our father's land, rich land. Water runs through it. She paused, choosing her words carefully. He believes if he takes us, our father will have no choice but to surrender everything. Takes you? Reed felt his stomach turn. You mean? Yes. Elena's voice went flat. He has done this before. 2 others. They did not survive to tell what happened. Reed's hands stilled on his rifle. The morning suddenly felt colder. How many men does he have? 6, maybe 7. Sarah spoke quietly from behind them. They know these hills better than anyone. Then why send you to me? Reed asked, the pieces still not quite fitting together. I'm one man with a rifle and a horse I just bought. Elena stepped closer, and for the first time, Reed saw past her defensive walls, saw the exhaustion, the terror she was barely holding back. Our father heard stories about you. 2 winters ago, the camp near Silver Ridge. She held his gaze. He heard that you stood between 12 miners and a woman they wanted to burn out. Alone, outnumbered. You did not run. I got lucky, Reed said quietly, and 3 of those miners are dead now. But the woman lived, Elena's voice cracked slightly. That is why he chose you. Not because you are perfect, because when it mattered, you did not walk away. Reed looked at the 2 women, at the way they kept glancing toward the doorway. He thought about the $12 in his pocket that now felt like blood money, about how a simple horse trade had turned into a gamble with lives he didn't know and deaths he might not prevent. This man, Blackwood, Reed said slowly, what exactly does he want with your father's land? Elena's face hardened. It is not just the land. There is something else, something valuable beneath it. Gold, perhaps, or something more. Turner's voice interrupted them again. I'm growing impatient, Reed. You've got 1 minute to send out the women, or we're coming in to get them. Reed checked his rifle, mentally counting his remaining ammunition. Not enough for a prolonged fight. We need a plan, he said, his decision made. And we need one fast. The abandoned mining camp fell silent as Turner's ultimatum hung in the air. Reed's mind raced through their limited options. The main entrance was covered by Turner and his men. The tunnel was their only viable escape route, but crawling through it would make them vulnerable. Easy targets if Turner's men discovered it. 1 minute is almost up, Reed, Turner called, his voice carrying an edge of impatience now. I'm trying to be reasonable here. Reed turned to Elena and Sarah. We need to buy time, he said in a hushed voice, and we need to split them up. Elena nodded, her eyes darting to the tunnel entrance. What do you suggest? Reed moved to the doorway, keeping himself hidden from direct view. Turner, he called back, let's talk about this. Who's Blackwood paying you to kidnap innocent women these days? A moment of tense silence followed before Turner responded, his tone noticeably less friendly. This isn't about money, Reed, it's about progress. Blackwood's bringing civilization to this territory, while savages like Walking Bear hold on to land they can't develop. Civilization, Reed repeated with contempt. Is that what you call forcing women from their homes? Murdering their families? Don't be dramatic, Turner replied. No one's talking about murder. Blackwood just wants what's rightfully his. While keeping Turner distracted with conversation, Reed signaled Elena to prepare their packs. She nodded, silently gathering their meager supplies while Sarah stood nervously by the tunnel entrance. And what exactly is rightfully his, Turner? Reed pressed. Gold under Walking Bear's land? Is that what this is about? Another pause, longer this time. When Turner spoke again, his voice had lowered, caution creeping in. You've been talking too much with these women, Reed. They've filled your head with stories. Reed caught Elena's eye, giving her a questioning look. She understood immediately, reaching into her clothing to pull out a small leather pouch. She handed it to Reed, who opened it to find a folded piece of deerskin inside. Some kind of map with crude markings indicating tunnels or caves beneath what appeared to be a lake. Not stories, Turner, Reed called back, studying the map quickly before returning it to Elena. Facts about a hidden treasure beneath Walking Bear's land. That's what Blackwood's really after, isn't it? The silence that followed told Reed he'd struck a nerve. He used the moment to motion Elena and Sarah toward the tunnel. Elena hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Reed behind. "I'll be right behind you," he whispered. "Go." "Is that what they told you, Reed?" Turner finally responded, his voice closer now. He was moving toward the building. "Tales of buried gold and ancient treasures? You always were too gullible for your own good." Reed positioned himself behind a partial wall that provided both cover and a clear view of the doorway. "Then why go to all of this trouble for a piece of worthless land, Lieutenant? Why send armed men to kidnap a chief's daughters?" "You have no idea what's at stake here," Turner replied. "This territory needs men like Blackwood, visionaries who can build something out of nothing." "By stealing what isn't theirs," Reed countered, watching as Elena reluctantly helped her sister into the tunnel before following herself. "Wasn't betraying your own men enough for you, Turner? Now you're hunting innocent women?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. When Turner spoke again, his voice had hardened to ice. "You don't know what you're talking about, Reed. What happened that night?" "I know exactly what happened," Reed interrupted, though in truth he had only suspicions, not proof. "You sold us out. The question is why? What did Blackwood offer you that was worth 8 men's lives?" "Time's up, Reed," Turner said, anger replacing the forced civility. "Send the women out now or we're coming in shooting." Reed knew Elena and Sarah would need more time to navigate the tunnel safely. He had to hold Turner's attention a bit longer. "We both know that's not going to happen, Lieutenant," he called back. "But here's a counteroffer. You leave now, ride back to Blackwood, and tell him Walking Bear's daughters are under my protection. This doesn't have to end with more blood on your hands." Turner's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You're outnumbered and outgunned, Reed, and I'm done talking." Reed heard the signal, a low whistle from Turner to his men. They were coming in. He moved quickly to the tunnel, knowing he had only seconds before Turner's men would breach the building. The opening was smaller than he'd anticipated, forcing him to drop his rifle and crawl forward on his elbows. The narrow passage was dark and claustrophobic, the earthen walls pressing in on all sides. Behind him, he heard boots scraping against stone as Turner's men entered the building. Shouts of confusion followed as they discovered their quarry gone. It wouldn't take them long to find the tunnel. Reed crawled faster, ignoring the sharp stones that cut into his palms and the roots that caught at his clothing. Ahead, faint light filtered through what he hoped was the exit. He could hear Elena and Sarah moving ahead of him, their progress slowed by the confined space. "They've found the tunnel," Sarah's panicked whisper floated back to him. "Keep moving," Reed urged. "Don't stop for anything." He'd barely finished speaking when a shot rang out behind him, the bullet splintering earth from the tunnel wall inches from his face. They'd found the entrance sooner than he'd expected, and at least one of Turner's men was small enough to follow them in. Another shot, closer this time. Reed couldn't turn in the narrow passage, couldn't defend himself. All he could do was push forward, trusting that Elena and Sarah had reached the exit and would be able to escape while Turner's man was occupied with him. The light ahead grew brighter. Reed could see an opening, feel fresh air on his face. One final push, and he emerged onto a narrow ledge cut into the mountainside, overlooking a steep slope that descended into the valley below. Elena and Sarah were there, pressed against the rock face, waiting for him. Elena had a small revolver in her hand, a weapon she must have kept hidden in her clothing. Her eyes were focused not on Reed but on the tunnel opening behind him, her expression fierce with determination. "Move aside," she ordered as Reed cleared the opening. He rolled to one side just as a hat appeared in the tunnel entrance, followed by the head and shoulders of one of Turner's men, a wiry fellow with a patchy beard. The man had only an instant to register his predicament before Elena fired. The shot was deafening in the confined space. The man jerked back with a cry of pain, disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. Whether he was dead or merely wounded, Reed couldn't tell, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. "We need to move," Reed said, getting to his feet. "They'll be coming around the mountain to cut us off, Mardo." The ledge they stood on was narrow, perhaps 3 feet wide, following the contour of the cliff face for about 20 yards before connecting to a steep, rough trail that descended to the valley below. It was treacherous terrain, but their only option. "This way," Elena said, already moving toward the trail. "Quickly." They had just reached the trail when shouts from above indicated that Turner and his remaining man had discovered their escape route. Reed urged the sisters ahead of him, then took position where the ledge met the trail, pistol ready. A head emerged from around the corner of the mountain, one of Turner's men, searching for them. Reed fired, deliberately missing but close enough to send the man ducking back with a startled yelp. That would buy them some time, but not much. Reed hurried after Elena and Sarah, who were already making their way down the steep trail. The path was treacherous, loose rock and exposed roots threatening to send them tumbling down the mountainside with each step. They were halfway down when a shot rang out from above. The bullet struck the rock near Reed's head, sending fragments flying. He felt a sharp sting as one caught his cheek, drawing blood. "Oh, keep going," he shouted to the sisters, turning to fire back up the trail. Through the swirling dust, Reed could make out two figures descending after them. Turner and one of his men. Another shot, closer this time. Reed returned fire, then continued his descent, moving as quickly as the dangerous trail allowed. Elena and Sarah had almost reached the bottom, where the path joined a broader game trail leading into the dense forest of the eastern valley. Reed glanced back up the slope. Turner and his companion had taken cover behind outcroppings of rock, firing intermittently to slow Reed's progress rather than with any real hope of hitting him at this distance. A bullet struck near Reed's foot, causing him to slip. He went down hard on one knee, pain shooting up his leg, but managed to regain his balance before he could fall further. The momentary stumble cost him precious seconds, allowing Turner to close the gap. "Nowhere to run, Reed," the lieutenant called down. "We've got men positioned throughout these mountains." Reed ignored the taunt, focusing on reaching the bottom of the trail where Elena and Sarah waited anxiously. As he joined them, he checked his pistol. One shot left. "Into the trees," he directed, pointing to where the forest grew thickest. "Stay low and keep moving." They plunged into the undergrowth, the dense vegetation offering concealment but making progress difficult. Reed led the way, choosing their path to minimize signs of their passing while maintaining as much speed as possible. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew more distant as Turner and his men reached the bottom of the trail and paused to determine which direction their quarry had taken. Reed pushed on, ignoring the burn in his muscles and the increasing throb from his injured knee. Elena and Sarah kept pace, their breathing labored but steady. They were stronger than they looked, these sisters, survivors in a world that had given them every reason to surrender. After what felt like hours but was likely only 30 minutes of hard travel, Reed called a halt in a small clearing beside a tumbling stream. All three were exhausted, their clothes torn and dirty from the difficult journey through the forest. "We need water," Reed said, his voice hoarse from exertion. "And we need to decide where we're going." Elena nodded, kneeling beside the stream to fill their single canteen. "There is a settlement, 2 days' journey north. Our father has friends there." 2 days on foot, Reed pointed out, through mountains with winter coming on, and with Turner's men hunting us. "Do you have a better suggestion?" Elena asked, passing him the filled canteen. Reed drank deeply, then handed it to Sarah. "No, but I need to know everything if we're going to survive this. What does Blackwood really want with your father's land? And why is Turner working for him?" Elena exchanged glances with her sister, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, she sighed and settled onto a fallen log. "The land has been in our family for generations," she began. "It sits at the meeting of 3 valleys, where underground springs form a lake that never freezes, even in the deepest winter. Our people believe the water has healing properties. And Blackwood wants it for what? A resort? Irrigation?" "No," Sarah spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "He wants what lies beneath the lake." Elena shot her sister a warning glance, but Sarah continued, pulling the small leather pouch from inside her dress. She opened it carefully, unfolding the deerskin map she had shown Reed earlier. "Our grandfather gave me this before he died," she explained. "It shows the tunnels beneath our land, tunnels that lead to a great cavern under the lake." Reed leaned closer, studying the map more carefully now. It was simple but clear, a network of passages radiating from a central chamber beneath what appeared to be the lake Elena had described. "What's in the cavern?" he asked. "Gold," Elena said flatly. "More gold than any man has ever seen, hidden there by our ancestors during the great wars between tribes, before the white men came." Reed sat back, considering this new information. And Blackwood knows about this? Elena nodded grimly. He and our father were once friends, many years ago when Blackwood was still a soldier stationed near our lands. Our father trusted him, showed him the old stories carved in stone near the lake. But not the map, Reed guessed. No, the map was kept secret, passed only from eldest to eldest at the time of death. But Blackwood is clever. He pieced together the stories, hired men to search for the entrance to the tunnels. Without success? Until now, Sarah said quietly. 3 weeks ago, one of his men found an opening. Our father collapsed it, but Blackwood knows he's close. Reed rubbed his chin, feeling the day's growth of beard beneath his fingers. So he's trying to force your father's hand by taking you. Yes, Elena confirmed, and he will not stop until he has what he wants. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture that made Reed's blood run cold. And Turner? How does he fit into all this? Elena's expression hardened. He is Blackwood's hunting dog, willing to do anything for money and power. Including selling out his own men, Reed said, the old suspicion finally confirmed. The night of the ambush, Blackwood arranged it, didn't he? To silence anyone who might have discovered what he was doing. Our father believes so, Elena acknowledged, though he has no proof. Reed stood, wincing as his injured knee protested the movement. Well, I'd say surviving that night is all the proof I need. He looked down at the sisters, his decision made. 2 days to the settlement, you said? Elena nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. Yes, if we move quickly and avoid the main trails. Then we better get moving, Reed said, helping her to her feet. We've got a long way to go, and Turner won't give up easily. As they prepared to continue their journey, Reed found himself thinking about Walking Bear's words. Sometimes the fate of many rests in the hands of those society has cast aside. The chief had known exactly what he was doing when he sold Reed that horse for $12 silver. He hadn't just been looking for protection for his daughters. He'd been seeking justice for a betrayal that had cost 8 soldiers their lives. Reed's men he'd been accused of abandoning, $12 for a chance at redemption. It was starting to seem like a bargain after all. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the forest as they made their way north, following game trails and stream beds to mask their tracks. Reed set a demanding pace, knowing that their head start on Turner wouldn't last long. The lieutenant knew these mountains too well and had too many men at his disposal. Sarah kept up better than Reed had expected, though he noticed how Elena stayed close to her sister, offering support when the terrain grew particularly difficult. There was a bond between them that went beyond mere family ties, a shared history of hardship that had forged them into survivors. As they climbed a ridge that offered a view of the valley behind them, Reed paused to study their back trail. No immediate signs of pursuit, but that didn't mean Turner wasn't closing in. The lieutenant was too experienced a tracker to follow blindly. He'd be predicting their route, trying to cut them off rather than chase them directly. See anything? Elena asked, joining him at the ridge crest. Reed shook his head. Nothing obvious, but Turner knows where we're headed. He'll try to intercept us. There is a place, Sarah said unexpectedly, her soft voice carrying in the quiet of the mountainside. An old winter camp of our people. No one has used it for many seasons, but the structures may still stand. Reed turned to her, interested. How far? Perhaps half a day's journey, Elena estimated. It lies just before the river crossing. It's on our way to the settlement? Elena nodded. Yes, just north of here, maybe 5 miles. Then that's our next destination, Reed decided. We can rest there, possibly find supplies, and plan our approach to the settlement. The sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication that Reed had noticed occurring frequently between them. What is it? He asked, sensing their hesitation. The winter camp, Elena said carefully. It is considered a place of bad spirits by many of our people. The last family to stay there fell ill and died. Since then, it has been abandoned. Reed raised an eyebrow. Illness or bad spirits? Does it matter? Elena countered. The result is the same. People died there. People die everywhere, Reed said pragmatically. Right now, I'm more concerned with making sure we don't join them by freezing or starving before we reach safety. Elena conceded the point with a slight nod, though her expression remained troubled. Sarah, however, seemed even more disturbed, her fingers worrying the leather pouch that held the map. My sister sees things others do not, Elena explained, noticing Reed's observation of Sarah. Dreams that sometimes come true, spirits that speak without words. Reed had spent enough time among native peoples to know better than to dismiss such claims outright. He'd witnessed too many inexplicable things on the frontier to maintain the rigid skepticism of his Eastern upbringing. "And what does she see about this camp?" he asked, addressing Sarah directly. The younger woman looked up, her dark eyes reflecting the afternoon light. "Death," she said simply, "but not from spirits, from men." The pronouncement hung in the air between them, adding a new layer of tension to their already precarious situation. "Turner's men?" Reed asked. Sarah shook her head slowly. "I don't know. The dream shows only shadows moving among the lodges, and then blood on the snow." Reed considered this, weighing the practical need for shelter against the warning in Sarah's dream. "We'll approach carefully," he decided finally. "Scout the area before committing. If anything seems wrong, we'll bypass it and continue directly to the river." This compromise seemed to satisfy Elena, though Sarah remained visibly uneasy. Reed understood her concern. Dreams or no, they were being hunted by dangerous men in increasingly hostile territory. Caution was their only real ally. As they descended from the ridge into the next valley, Reed found himself watching Sarah more closely. The younger sister had been largely silent during their journey, deferring to Elena in most matters. But there was a quiet strength to her, a resilience that manifested in different ways than her sister's more obvious courage. "Your sister," Reed said quietly to Elena, as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. "She has the gift of second sight." Elena glanced ahead to make sure Sarah was out of earshot before responding. "Since childhood, our mother had it too. Among our people, such gifts are respected but also feared. Sarah has struggled with it. The visions are not always clear, and they can be disturbing." "Do they come true, these visions?" Elena's expression turned grim. "Often enough that we have learned to heed them. 3 summers ago, she dreamed of a great fire consuming our village. 1 week later, lightning struck a lodge during a storm. 5 people died before the flames were controlled." Reed nodded thoughtfully. "And these dreams about the winter camp?" "They began after our grandfather's death," Elena said. "That is why I am concerned. He was the one who showed her the tunnels beneath our land, who gave her the map. His spirit may be trying to warn her. Or it could just be fear," Reed suggested gently, "given everything that's happened." Elena shrugged. "Perhaps, but I have learned to trust my sister's dreams, even when I do not understand them." They continued in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The forest grew denser as they moved deeper into the valley, the trees older and taller, with thick underbrush that made progress slow and tiring. By late afternoon, the light was beginning to fade, filtered through the dense canopy above. "We're still several hours from the winter camp," Elena observed, concern evident in her voice. "We will not reach it before dark." Reed had been thinking the same thing. Traveling through unfamiliar forest at night was risky under the best circumstances. With Turner hunting them, it was doubly dangerous. "We need to find shelter for the night," he agreed. "Somewhere defensible if possible." Sarah, who had been walking slightly ahead, stopped suddenly. "Listen," she whispered. Reed and Elena fell silent, straining to hear whatever had caught Sarah's attention. At first, there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the occasional call of a bird. Then Reed heard it, the faint but unmistakable sound of human voices carried on the wind from somewhere ahead. He motioned for the sisters to stay put, then moved forward cautiously, using the trees for cover as he approached a small rise that blocked their view ahead. At the crest, he lowered himself to the ground and crawled the last few feet, peering carefully over the edge. Below, perhaps a quarter-mile distant, lay what appeared to be the winter camp Sarah had described. A collection of conical lodges, some partially collapsed, arranged in a rough circle around a central clearing. And moving among those lodges were men, at least 4 that Reed could see, all armed. He watched for several minutes, trying to determine if these were Turner's men. But their manner of dress and movement suggested otherwise. These weren't disciplined trackers or former soldiers, but rough-looking frontiersmen, the kind of drifters and opportunists who lived on the margins of civilization. Reed retreated carefully to where Elena and Sarah waited. There are men at the winter camp, he reported in a hushed voice. Not Turners, I think. Looks like squatters or maybe trappers using it as a base. Elena's expression darkened. Our people would never allow outsiders to occupy a sacred place. They may not have had a choice, Reed pointed out. There are at least 4 armed men down there, and they've made themselves at home. Sarah clutched her sister's arm, fear evident in her eyes. The shadows in the lodges, she whispered. From my dream. Elena placed a reassuring hand over her sister's. We will avoid them, she said firmly, looking to Reed for confirmation. Reed nodded. We'll circle wide around the camp, find another place to shelter for the night. He studied the darkening sky visible through the trees. There's maybe an hour of light left. Let's make the most of it. They altered their course, angling northeast to bypass the winter camp, while still moving generally toward the settlement that was their ultimate destination. The terrain grew more difficult as they left the established game trails, forcing them to navigate dense underbrush and rocky outcroppings that slowed their progress considerably. Twilight was deepening when they came upon a small cave set into a hillside, little more than a shallow depression in the rock, but deep enough to provide some shelter from the elements and concealment from searching eyes. This will have to do, Reed decided, examining the cave carefully for signs of animal occupation. Finding none, he gestured the sisters inside. We'll rest here tonight. Continue at first light. The cave was cramped but dry, its floor covered with a layer of pine needles and leaves blown in by the wind. Reed gathered additional branches to create a crude screen across the entrance, providing both additional insulation and concealment. No fire tonight, he said as he worked. Too risky with those men nearby. Elena nodded in agreement, helping Sarah settle into the most protected corner of the cave. The younger woman looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, testament to the strain of their flight. She needs rest, Elena said quietly to Reed. And food. We all do. Reed reached into his pack, extracting the meager supplies they had managed to bring from the mining camp. A small bundle of dried meat and a handful of dried berries. He divided it into 3 portions, handing the largest to Sarah. Eat, he encouraged her. You need your strength. Sarah accepted the food with a grateful nod, though her eyes remained distant, troubled by thoughts she wasn't sharing. As darkness fell completely, the temperature dropped precipitously. Without a fire, the cold seeped into the cave, into their bones. They huddled together for warmth, Reed positioned nearest the entrance where he could keep watch. I'll take first watch, he said. You two get some sleep. I'll wake you in a few hours, Elena. Elena settled beside her sister, wrapping their single blanket around both of them. Wake me sooner if you need rest, she insisted. You are injured. Reed had almost forgotten the cut on his cheek and his injured knee, adrenaline having masked the pain during their flight. Now, as they settled into stillness, the throbbing returned with renewed intensity. I'll be fine, he assured her, though his body protested the lie. Get some sleep while you can. Elena's eyes met his in the darkness, concern evident in them. Thank you, she said softly, for not abandoning us when you could have. The simple gratitude caught Reed off guard. He'd been so focused on survival, on the mechanics of their escape, that he hadn't fully processed the choice he'd made back at the campfire. He could have sent the sisters away, continued with his original plan to cross the pass alone. Instead, he'd chosen to protect them, to face Turner and his men, to place himself squarely in the path of danger. I made a deal, he said finally. $12 for a horse and everything needed for my journey. Turns out that included 2 passengers I wasn't expecting. A faint smile touched Elena's lips. Is that the only reason? A deal? Reed hesitated, considering her question. Was it just about honoring a transaction? Or was there something more? Something that had compelled him to stand between these women and harm, just as he had stood between the widow at Silver Creek and the miners who would have driven her from her claim? No, he admitted, not just a deal. I've spent 3 years being judged for something I didn't do, being hunted for a crime I didn't commit. I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn. Elena's gaze softened. Our father said you were a good man, that beneath your hard shell, there was honor. Your father gambled everything on that assessment, Reed pointed out, including his daughters' lives. He had no choice, Elena replied. Blackwood left us none. Reed couldn't argue with that. Walking Bear had made a desperate play, using his last resources, $12 and a fine horse, to secure protection for his daughters and the secret they carried. Get some sleep, Reed said again, turning his attention to the cave entrance. Tomorrow will be a long day. Elena nodded, settling closer to her sister, who was already drifting into an exhausted slumber. Within minutes, both women were asleep, their breathing deep and regular in the quiet of the cave. Reed shifted position, trying to find a more comfortable arrangement for his injured knee. The pain had settled into a dull throb, manageable but constant. The cut on his cheek stung in the cold air, and he could feel dried blood caked on his skin. Outside, the night had deepened, stars appearing in the patches of sky visible through the trees. The familiar constellations offered some comfort, constance in a world where everything else seemed in flux. Reed found the North Star, mentally orienting himself. The settlement they sought lay in that direction, perhaps 20 miles distant. 2 days' travel through difficult terrain, if they were lucky. Longer if Turner continued to dog their steps. The hours passed slowly. Reed fought against fatigue, forcing himself to stay alert despite his body's demands for rest. Every sound in the forest drew his attention. The rustle of nocturnal creatures, the soft hoot of an owl, the sigh of wind through the pines. Each could be natural, or it could be Turner's men closing in. It was near midnight when a new sound reached Reed's ears. Voices, distant but growing closer. Men moving through the forest. He tensed, reaching for his pistol, then remembered he had only one shot remaining. Not enough if this was Turner's group. The voices grew clearer, accompanied by the crack of branches and the thud of boots on the forest floor. Not Turner's men, Reed realized as snatches of conversation reached him. These were the squatters from the winter camp, moving through the forest for reasons unknown. "Told you I saw smoke earlier," one voice was saying. "Someone's in these woods." "Could have been anything," another replied. "A lightning strike, a campfire from days ago still smoldering." "Nah, this was fresh," the first insisted. "And with that bounty Blackwood's offering, it's worth checking." Reed's blood ran cold. Blackwood had put a bounty on them. That explained the men at the winter camp, not just squatters, but bounty hunters drawn by the promise of reward. He moved deeper into the cave, gently shaking Elena awake. Her eyes opened immediately, alert despite her interrupted sleep. "Men coming," Reed whispered. "Bounty hunters. They're searching the woods." Elena's hand went to her sister, rousing Sarah with a gentle touch. "How close?" she whispered back. "Too close," Reed replied, "and getting closer. We need to move." Sarah sat up, instantly alert despite being woken from deep sleep. "They're searching for us?" Reed nodded grimly. "Blackwood's put out a bounty. These men are from the winter camp." Elena's expression hardened. "How many?" "I heard at least 2 voices. There could be more." The sisters exchanged looks, communicating without words in that way they had. Then Elena reached into her dress and produced the small revolver she'd used at the tunnel exit. "I have 3 bullets left," she said. Reed nodded in acknowledgement. With his single remaining shot, that gave them 4 bullets against an unknown number of armed men. Not favorable odds, but better than nothing. "We need to slip past them," he said, moving to the cave entrance to peer out into the darkness. "Find a new direction that takes us away from both these men and the winter camp." Outside, the voices had grown louder, more distinct. The bounty hunters were methodically searching the hillside, working their way toward the cave. "Check that outcropping," one was saying. "Could be a good shelter spot." "You're wasting our time," another complained. "They're long gone by now." "Blackwood's paying $50 a head," the first replied. "I'm checking every damn hole in this mountain." $50. The amount registered with Reed as both outrageous and illuminating. Blackwood was offering more than 4 times what Walking Bear had paid for Reed's help. The realization underscored just how desperate the chief had been, and how valuable the secret beneath his land truly was. "They're coming directly this way," Reed whispered, withdrawing from the entrance. "We're out of time." Elena had already helped Sarah gather their few possessions. Both women stood ready, their faces set with determination despite the fear evident in their eyes. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Reed assessed their options, none of them good. They could try to hide deeper in the cave, but if the bounty hunters were thorough, they'd be discovered. They could try to slip out and run, But in the darkness, on unfamiliar terrain, they'd likely be heard or spotted, or they could stand and fight, a desperate last resort. We're going to have to rush them, Reed decided, the plan forming even as he spoke. Use surprise to our advantage. I'll go out first, create a distraction. You two slip past in the confusion, head north toward the river. I'll catch up when I can. Elena shook her head firmly. We stay together, she insisted. Three has better chance than one alone. This isn't a debate, Reed replied. Those men are after the bounty. If I can convince them I'm alone, that you two have gone another way, they'll focus on me. It gives you a better chance. And what about your chance? Elena demanded, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. Against how many men? With one bullet? Reed met her gaze steadily. I've faced worse odds. Not this time, Sarah interrupted, her soft voice carrying unexpected authority. Both Reed and Elena turned to her in surprise. My dream, she continued. It was not just about the winter camp. I saw us separated, you, she looked directly at Reed, facing many men alone, and blood on the snow. Reed felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. Your dreams don't always come true, he reminded her gently. Often enough that we have learned to heed them, Sarah replied, echoing her sister's earlier words. We stay together. Find another way. The voices outside had grown alarmingly close. Any moment now, the bounty hunters would discover the cave. Time for debate had run out. All right, Reed conceded, together. But we need a plan, fast. Elena moved to the cave entrance, peering out cautiously. There, she whispered, pointing to a dense thicket of underbrush about 20 yards to the right of the cave. If we can reach that without being seen, we can work our way down the hillside using the brush for cover. Reed nodded. It was risky. They'd be exposed for those 20 yards. But it was their best option. I'll go first, he said. When I signal, you follow, fast and quiet. Elena nodded, positioning herself and Sarah near the entrance, ready to move. Reed took a deep breath, steadying himself. Then, in one fluid motion, he slipped through the branches they'd arranged across the cave opening and out into the night. The cold air hit him like a physical blow after the relative warmth of their shelter. He crouched low, using the darkness and the scattered boulders for cover as he assessed the situation. Two men were visible, moving slowly up the hillside about 50 yards below the cave. Both carried rifles and wore the rough clothing of frontiersmen. A third voice called from further away, suggesting at least one more searcher in the vicinity. Reed waited until the two visible men had turned slightly away, then moved quickly toward the thicket Elena had identified. He reached it without incident, concealing himself among the dense branches. From this position, he could see the cave entrance clearly. He raised his hand, signaling Elena and Sarah to follow. The sisters emerged from the cave like shadows, moving with the silent grace of those accustomed to traveling unseen. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the thicket when disaster struck. Sarah's foot dislodged a stone, sending it tumbling down the hillside with a clatter that seemed deafening in the quiet night. The bounty hunters reacted instantly, swinging their rifles toward the sound. There, one shouted. On the hillside! Reed didn't hesitate. He burst from the thicket, firing his pistol into the air. Over here, he yelled, drawing their attention away from the sisters. The distraction worked. Both men turned toward him, momentarily confused by the new threat. Reed used that confusion, charging directly at them, while Elena pulled Sarah toward the cover of the thicket. The bounty hunters recovered quickly. One fired, his shot going wide in the darkness. The other swung his rifle like a club as Reed closed the distance, catching him a glancing blow on the shoulder. Reed staggered but didn't fall, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection and taking them both to the ground. They grappled in the dirt and pine needles, each fighting for advantage. Reed's opponent was younger and stronger, but Reed had the desperation of a man who knew defeat meant death. He managed to land a solid blow to the bounty hunter's jaw, momentarily stunning him. The second man had circled around, looking for a clean shot. Hold still, damn you, he shouted to his companion. Reed rolled, using the first bounty hunter as a shield. The man beneath him squirmed, trying to break free. Shoot him, Parker! Just shoot him! Parker hesitated, his rifle trained on the struggling pair, but unwilling to risk hitting his friend. That hesitation was all Elena needed. From the cover of the thicket, she fired her revolver. The shot went wide, but it was enough to send Parker diving for cover. Reed used the distraction to deliver a final, decisive blow to his opponent's temple, rendering him unconscious. He grabbed the man's rifle and scrambled to his feet, moving quickly toward the thicket where Elena and Sarah waited. "Run," he urged as he reached them, "down the hill toward the river." They didn't need to be told twice. The three of them plunged down the hillside using the dense underbrush for cover as they fled. Behind them, shouts indicated that Parker had been joined by at least one more bounty hunter, and they were in pursuit. The descent was treacherous in the darkness, the ground falling away steeply beneath their feet. More than once, Reed had to catch himself against a tree trunk to avoid tumbling headlong down the incline. Elena and Sarah moved with more surety, their familiarity with mountain terrain evident in their graceful navigation of the difficult slope. They reached the bottom of the hill in minutes, emerging onto level ground covered in tall grass that rustled with their passing. Ahead, Reed could hear the soft gurgle of flowing water, the river they'd been aiming for. "This way," Elena said, taking the lead. "There is a ford upstream." They followed the river's course, staying within the tree line that bordered its banks for cover. The moon had risen, casting enough light to illuminate their path, but also making them more visible to any pursuers. Reed kept glancing back, watching for signs that the bounty hunters were closing in. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably no more than half an hour, they reached the ford Elena had mentioned, a shallow stretch of river where stones broke the water's surface, providing a precarious but passable crossing. "Once we're across," Elena said, pausing to catch her breath, "we'll be closer to the settlement. Another day's journey at most." Reed studied the ford, then the far bank. "They'll expect us to cross here," he pointed out. "It's too obvious." "There is no other crossing for miles in either direction," Elena replied. "The river grows too deep, the current too strong." Reed considered their options. "Then we cross here, but not in the way they'd expect. We go downstream a ways first, enter the water where the banks are steeper. Make it look like we tried to swim across." Elena understood immediately. "Leave false signs, make them think we were swept downstream." "Exactly." Reed turned to Sarah, who had been unusually quiet during their flight. "Are you all right?" The younger woman nodded, though her face was drawn with fatigue. "I can continue," she assured him. "Good," Reed said, "because we've got a long night ahead of us." They moved downstream about a quarter mile to where the river widened and deepened. Here, Reed deliberately scuffed the bank, creating marks that suggested several people had entered the water. He even went so far as to leave one of their blankets caught on a branch hanging low over the river, as if it had been snagged there by the current. "Now we double back to the ford," he explained, "cross there, and continue north." The ruse took precious time, but Reed believed it would be worth it if it threw off their pursuers even briefly. When they finally regained the ford again, the night had grown colder, a bitter wind sweeping down from the mountains. "I'll go first," Reed said, testing the nearest stepping stone with his foot. "Follow exactly where I step." The crossing was precarious, the stones slippery with moss and the water numbing cold where it occasionally rose to their ankles. But they made it across without incident, pulling themselves up the far bank with relief. "Now we move fast," Reed directed, helping Sarah up the slope. "Put as much distance between us and this river as we can before dawn." They struck out northward, following a faint game trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The terrain was gentler on this side of the river, the slope gradual rather than precipitous. They made good time, despite their exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that safety lay ahead and danger behind. As they walked, Reed found himself watching Elena more closely. She moved with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness, leading them unerringly through terrain that would have bewildered most people in daylight, let alone darkness. There was strength in her that went beyond the physical, a resilience of spirit that had enabled her to endure Blackwood's threats, to protect her sister, to trust a stranger with their lives because there was no other choice. She must have felt his gaze, for she glanced back at him, a question in her eyes. "Your father," Reed said quietly, falling into step beside her. "He planned this more carefully than I realized, didn't he? This wasn't just about protection. It was about justice." "Asayaman." Elena nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Yes, he believed you deserved the chance to clear your name, to face those who betrayed you. My father says a man's true character is revealed not in how he treats friends, but in how he treats enemies." Elena continued after a moment. He watched you closely during that boundary negotiation 3 summers ago. He saw something in you that others missed. Reed hadn't considered Walking Bear's deeper motives until now. In the chaos of their flight, he'd been focused solely on survival. But Elena was right. There had been a larger purpose behind the chief's actions all along. There will be time for Turner later, he said, after you and Sarah are safe. Elena studied him in the moonlight, her dark eyes seeming to peer into his very soul. And then, when this is over? It was a question Reed had been avoiding. What came after? If they reached the settlement, if they survived Blackwood's hunters, if they somehow managed to expose the truth about the ambush, what then? His plan had been to cross the northern pass, to leave the territory and his past behind. But that was before Walking Bear's daughters, before the revelation about Turner's betrayal, before Elena. I don't know, he admitted. I hadn't planned beyond survival. A faint smile touched her lips. Sometimes that is enough. To survive one more day, to see one more sunrise. The simple wisdom in her words struck Reed deeply. He'd been so focused on escape, on outrunning his past, that he'd forgotten what it meant to simply live, to face each day as it came, with whatever joy or sorrow it might bring. Your father is a wise man, Reed said at last. Yes, Elena agreed, and he trusted you with what he values most in this world. She glanced back at Sarah, who was following a few paces behind, lost in her own thoughts. That trust was not given lightly. The weight of that responsibility settled on Reed's shoulders, not as a burden, but as something precious and important. Walking Bear had entrusted him with his daughters' lives, with the secret of the gold beneath the lake, with the chance for justice. All for $12 silver. It was a trade that had seemed suspicious at the time, too good to be true. Now Reed understood it for what it was. Not a transaction, but a gamble. A desperate hope that the disgraced scout would prove to be the man Walking Bear believed him to be. I won't let him down, Reed said, the words of promise to Elena, to her father, and to himself. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The moon slid behind clouds, casting the forest into deeper shadow. But ahead, faintly visible through the trees, lay their path. And beyond that, the settlement, safety, justice. Reed squared his shoulders and pressed on. They still had a long way to go, and dawn was hours away yet. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Reed, Elena, and Sarah had walked through most of the night, pushing themselves to put as much distance as possible between them and their pursuers. Now, exhaustion demanded its due. They had found shelter in a stand of dense pines, the thick branches providing both concealment and some protection from the biting wind that swept down from the snow-covered peaks. Reed leaned against a tree trunk, his body aching with fatigue. His injured knee had swollen considerably during their flight, and each step had become an exercise in endurance. Elena sat nearby, keeping watch while Sarah dozed fitfully, wrapped in their remaining blanket. How much farther to the settlement? Reed asked, his voice low to avoid waking Sarah. Elena's gaze remained fixed on the valley below, scanning for any sign of movement. Perhaps 10 miles. We could reach it by nightfall if we push hard. Reed nodded, though the prospect of another day's hard travel made his knee throb in anticipation. And your father's friends there? They can be trusted? Benjamin Miller is a good man, Elena replied. He was one of the first settlers to trade fairly with our people. His son married a woman from our tribe before she died in childbirth. The bond remains. Miller, Reed repeated, the name stirring a vague memory. I've heard that name before. Elena glanced at him. His eldest son was a soldier, James Miller. The name hit Reed like a physical blow. James Miller was in my unit, he said softly. He died in the ambush, one of the 8. Elena's eyes widened slightly. Then it was no coincidence my father chose you. The Millers have been seeking justice for James's death for 3 years. They never believed the official story about a rogue scout leading his men into a trap. The pieces were falling into place now. Walking Bear hadn't just been looking for protection for his daughters. He had been orchestrating a convergence of forces against Blackwood. The disgraced scout seeking redemption. The bereaved family seeking justice. The tribal chief protecting his people's land and legacy. $12 for a far more complex arrangement than Reed had ever suspected. Your father is a more cunning strategist than I gave him credit for, Reed observed. A faint smile touched Elena's lips. He says that in a world where we cannot match the white man's numbers or weapons, we must rely on wisdom and patience. And sacrifice, Reed added, thinking of the precious mare Walking Bear had given up as part of his plan. Elena's expression sobered. Yes, always sacrifice. They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the morning light strengthened. Reed found himself studying Elena's profile, struck by the quiet dignity she maintained despite their desperate circumstances. There was a strength in her that went beyond the physical, a core of resilience forged by hardship and responsibility. Sarah stirred, waking with the sudden alertness of someone accustomed to danger. Her dark eyes focused instantly, taking in their surroundings before settling on her sister. I dreamed again, she said softly. Elena moved to her side, concern evident in her expression. What did you see? Sarah hesitated, her gaze shifting to Reed before continuing. Blood on white stones, a man with two faces, and fire rising from water. Reed listened carefully, no longer dismissing these visions as mere superstition. Sarah's previous warnings had proven too accurate to ignore. Was there anything else? Elena asked. Anything about our path ahead? Sarah closed her eyes briefly as if searching her memory of the dream. Crossroads, she said finally. A choice between two paths. One leads to safety, but the other to truth. We cannot walk both. Reed exchanged glances with Elena. The vision, if that's what it was, echoed their current dilemma. The settlement offered safety, a chance for Elena and Sarah to find protection among friends. But it did nothing to address the larger threat, Blackwood and his relentless pursuit of the gold beneath Walking Bear's land. We should eat something, Reed said, pushing himself to his feet with an effort, then decide our next move. Their breakfast was meager, the last of their dried meat and berries, shared equally between them. Reed felt the gnaw of hunger even after he'd finished his portion, a reminder of how precarious their situation remained. Without food, without proper rest, their strength would fail long before they reached safety. As they prepared to resume their journey, Reed found himself watching Sarah. The younger sister had been mostly silent during their flight, overshadowed by Elena's more assertive presence. But there was a quiet wisdom in her eyes that belied her youth, a depth of perception that went beyond the normal senses. These visions of yours, Reed said to her as they gathered their few possessions. How long have you had them? Sarah glanced at her sister as if seeking permission to speak openly. Elena nodded almost imperceptibly. Since I was a child, Sarah replied, her voice soft but steady. At first they were simple things, where to find lost objects, when the rain would come. But after our mother died, they changed, became darker, more difficult to understand. Your mother had the same gift? Sarah nodded. It passes through the women in our family, from mother to daughter. Not all receive it, but those who do carry a heavy burden. Because knowing the future doesn't always mean you can change it, Reed guessed. Yes, Sarah said, a trace of surprise in her eyes at his understanding. To see suffering coming but be unable to prevent it. It is a special kind of pain. Reed thought about his own past, the ambush he had sensed coming but failed to prevent, the deaths he had been powerless to stop. Perhaps he understood more about Sarah's burden than she realized. We should move, Elena interrupted, her practical nature asserting itself. The day grows late, and we have far to go. They set out once more, following game trails that wound through the forested slopes. Reed set the pace, pushing himself despite the pain in his knee. Elena walked beside him, matching his stride for stride, while Sarah followed close behind. The terrain was less rugged on this side of the river, making their progress easier, but also leaving them more exposed if Turner or the bounty hunters had managed to pick up their trail. By midday, they had covered several miles, the distant shape of the settlement just visible through gaps in the trees, a cluster of log buildings nestled in a protected valley. The sight gave them renewed energy. The promise of safety within reach. We should reach the outskirts by dusk, Elena said, relief evident in her voice. Reed wasn't so optimistic. They still had open ground to cross, and the afternoon light would make them visible to anyone watching the approaches. Turner was too experienced a tracker, too determined a hunter, to give up so easily. And the bounty Blackwood had placed on their heads would attract others eager for easy money. His concerns proved prophetic when they crested a small rise and saw what awaited them in the valley below. A group of riders, 5 men on horseback, were positioned along the main trail leading to the settlement, clearly waiting for someone. Even at this distance, Reed recognized the military bearing of 2 of the men. Turner's group had gotten ahead of them somehow, cutting off the direct route to safety. Reed pulled Elena and Sarah back from the ridgeline before they could be spotted. "Turner's men," he said grimly. "They've set up a blockade on the main approach." Elena's expression hardened. "How? We crossed the river, the false trail." "Didn't fool them for long," Reed finished, "or they split up, sent men ahead to cover all possible routes while the others tracked us." "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, fear evident in her voice. Reed studied the terrain, considering their options. The direct path to the settlement was blocked, but there might be another way. "We need to circle wide," he decided. "Approach from the east rather than the north. It'll add miles to our journey, but it's our best chance of avoiding their patrol." Elena nodded in agreement, though concern shadowed her eyes. "We will not reach the settlement before dark if we take that route." "Better late than never," Reed said, offering a grim smile. "Or not at all." They altered their course, descending into a shallow ravine that would keep them hidden as they worked their way east. The detour would cost them precious time and energy, but Reed saw no alternative. A confrontation with Turner's men in open terrain, with their limited ammunition and exhausted condition, would end badly. The afternoon wore on as they made their slow way through increasingly difficult terrain. The ravine narrowed, its sides steepening until they were forced to scramble over loose rock and around fallen trees. Reed's knee protested each step, the pain growing from a dull throb to a sharp, insistent agony. But he pushed on, knowing that to stop now would doom them all. It was approaching dusk when disaster struck. As they navigated a particularly treacherous section of the ravine, the ground beneath Sarah's feet suddenly gave way. With a startled cry, she slid downward in a shower of loose stones and dirt. Elena lunged for her sister, barely catching her hand before she would have fallen into a deep crevasse that had been hidden by undergrowth. "Hold on!" Elena gasped, struggling to maintain her grip as the shifting ground threatened to take her down as well. Reed moved as quickly as his injured leg would allow, throwing himself flat to distribute his weight as he reached for Sarah's other hand. Together, he and Elena managed to pull the younger woman to safer ground, all 3 breathing heavily from the exertion and fear. "Are you hurt?" Elena asked, examining her sister for injuries. Sarah shook her head, though her face was pale with shock. "No, just frightened." Reed's attention had shifted to their surroundings. The rock slide, minor as it was, had created noise that might carry in the quiet of the evening. He scanned the ridgeline above them, alert for any sign they had been detected. For several long moments, nothing moved. Then, just as Reed began to hope they had escaped notice, a figure appeared at the top of the ravine, a silhouette against the darkening sky. The man stood motionless, rifle in hand, staring directly at where they crouched in the gathering shadows. Reed reached for his borrowed rifle, knowing even as he did so that they were at a severe disadvantage. The man above had the high ground and clear sight lines, while they were trapped in the narrow confines of the ravine with limited cover. "Don't shoot," Elena whispered urgently. "Not yet." Reed hesitated, his finger on the trigger. The figure above hadn't raised his weapon, hadn't called out to alert others. He simply stood watching, as if assessing the situation. Then, to Reed's astonishment, the man deliberately turned away, disappearing from the ridgeline as silently as he had appeared. "What just happened?" Reed muttered, not lowering his rifle. "That was one of Turner's men. I'm sure of it." Elena's expression was puzzled. "Why would he let us go? Why not raise the alarm?" "Maybe he's going for reinforcements," Reed suggested, "or circling around to trap us." "Or maybe," Sarah said quietly, "not all of Blackwood's men are as loyal as he believes." The observation gave Reed pause. He remembered Turner's words from the mining camp, the lieutenant's insistence that their confrontation wasn't about money, but about progress and civilization. What if some of Turner's men had begun to question the morality of hunting women for a gold claim? What if the veneer of righteous purpose Blackwood had constructed was beginning to crack? Regardless, we need to move, Reed decided. If that man chose not to report us, I'm not going to waste the opportunity. They continued their journey with renewed urgency, working their way out of the ravine as dusk deepened into night. The eastern approach to the settlement was less guarded than the northern route, but Reed knew better than to assume it would be completely unprotected. Turner was too thorough for that. As darkness closed around them, they found themselves at the edge of a meadow that separated them from the first outlying cabins of the settlement. Beyond, the warm glow of lamps and hearth fires beckoned with the promise of safety. But to reach it, they would need to cross several hundred yards of open ground, exposed and vulnerable. "We wait for full dark," Reed said, settling behind a fallen log that offered some concealment. "Then we cross together, fast and quiet. No stopping, no matter what happens." Elena and Sarah nodded their understanding, their faces pale ovals in the gathering darkness. They huddled close together, seeking warmth against the chill that descended with the night. As they waited, Reed found himself thinking about what awaited them in the settlement. Would Benjamin Miller believe their story? Would he be willing to act against Blackwood, a man of wealth and influence based on the testimony of a disgraced scout and two native women? And even if he did, what could one settlement do against Blackwood's resources? These questions were still circling in Reed's mind when the faint but unmistakable sound of approaching horses reached them. He tensed, signaling for Elena and Sarah to remain absolutely still. Through gaps in the trees, he could see riders moving along the edge of the meadow, three men, their attention focused on the settlement ahead rather than the forest behind them. "Another patrol," Reed whispered as the riders passed without detecting them. "Turner's got the settlement surrounded." Elena's expression hardened with determination. "Then we find another way in." "Or another destination entirely," Reed countered, an idea taking shape in his mind. "The settlements watched. They'll be expecting us to go there seeking help." "We have nowhere else to go," Elena pointed out. "That's not entirely true," Reed said, his decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "There's one place Blackwood wants more than anything. One place he's already committed crimes to acquire." Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. "Our father's land." "Exactly. If Blackwood's focused his men on the settlement, expecting us to run there, his attention is diverted from what he truly seeks," Elena finished. "But why would we go there? It offers no safety, no allies." Reed met her gaze steadily. "Because it's time we stopped running and started fighting back. Your father sent me those maps for a reason. The gold beneath the lake, it's not just treasure, it's leverage. Proof of why Blackwood wanted your land badly enough to murder for it." "You're suggesting we go directly to the source," Elena said slowly. "Use the tunnels, find the gold, secure evidence of Blackwood's true motives. And in doing so, draw him into the open." Reed nodded. "Force a confrontation on ground of our choosing, not his." It was a dangerous plan, perhaps even foolhardy. But as Reed studied the settlement, now visibly guarded by Turner's men, he realized they had run out of safe options. Sooner or later, Turner would find them. Better to choose the battlefield than to be hunted down like animals. Sarah had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "This is what my dream foretold. The crossroads. Two paths, safety or truth." "And the blood on white stones?" Reed asked. "The man with two faces? Fire rising from water?" Sarah shook her head. "Those parts remain unclear, but I know this, our path lies not there." She nodded toward the settlement, but back toward our home. Elena looked between her sister and Reed, conflict evident in her expression. Then her features settled into resolute determination. "If we do this, we do it together. No sacrificing yourself to save us," she said directly to Reed. "That is the condition." Reed held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Together," he agreed, "for better or worse." "My father saw more clearly than I gave him credit for," Reed added quietly. "When he paid those $12, he wasn't just buying a horse and a protector. He was investing in justice, for his land, for his daughters, and for me." Elena's eyes softened. He always said that true value isn't measured in coins, but in the character of those who carry them. They waited until the patrol had moved well past their position before retreating back into the forest. Their new course would take them northwest, circling wide around both the settlement and Turner's men, eventually bringing them to Walking Bear's land. It was a journey of at least a day, possibly more given their condition and the need for stealth. The night deepened around them as they traveled, the stars emerging in a clear, cold sky. Reed set a careful pace, mindful of their exhaustion and his own injury. Elena walked beside him, her presence a steady comfort in the darkness. Sarah followed, occasionally pausing as if listening to voices only she could hear, then hurrying to catch up. "Your sister," Reed said quietly to Elena during one such pause. "Has she always been different?" Elena glanced back to ensure Sarah was still out of earshot. "From earliest childhood. Our people call those with her gift bridge walkers, those who can move between the world of spirits and the world of flesh. It is considered both blessing and burden." "And these visions of hers, have they always come true?" Elena's expression grew somber. "Often enough that we have learned to heed them. When she was 10, she dreamed of fire consuming our village. 1 week later, lightning struck a lodge during a storm. 5 died before the flames were controlled." Reed absorbed this, his skepticism warring with the evidence of Sarah's unusual perception. "And your father, does he share this gift?" "No, but he respects it. In our tribe's councils, those with the sight are given special voice." Elena hesitated, then added, "It is why he entrusted the map to Sarah, not me. He believed her gift would guide her, guide all of us when the time came." The revelation cast their journey in a new light. Walking Bear hadn't just been sending his daughters to safety, he had been setting in motion a chain of events guided by Sarah's visions. The $12, the horse, Reed's involvement, all part of a plan that extended beyond the merely tactical. They traveled through the night, stopping only for brief rests when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. By dawn, they had covered several miles, working their way steadily northwest toward Walking Bear's land. The mountains loomed closer now, their peaks catching the first light of day, while the valleys remained shrouded in shadow. Reed called a halt in a protected hollow where a spring provided fresh water. All three were near collapse, having pushed their bodies to the limit and beyond. They needed food and rest if they were to have any hope of completing their journey. "I'll try to find something to eat," Reed said, taking the rifle. "You two should rest while you can." Elena nodded, too exhausted to argue. She helped Sarah settle against a tree trunk, wrapping their blanket around both of them for warmth. Within moments, the younger woman had fallen into an exhausted slumber. Reed moved carefully through the surrounding forest, alert for any game that might provide a meal. His scout training served him well. Within an hour, he had managed to bring down 2 rabbits with well-placed shots. Not a feast, but enough to restore some of their strength. When he returned to the hollow, he found Elena awake, but Sarah still sleeping. Elena's expression lightened at the sight of the rabbits. "You have a hunter's skill," she observed as Reed set about preparing the small animals. "My father taught me," Reed replied, working quickly and efficiently. "Before he died in the mines, said a man who could feed himself would never starve, no matter what else he lost." Elena helped him build a small, smokeless fire to cook their meal. "And your mother? You have not spoken of her." "She died when I was young. Fever took her one winter." Reed's voice held the flatness of old grief, long accepted but never truly forgotten. "After that, it was just me and my father until the mining accident. Then I was alone." "Yet you found your way," Elena observed. "Became a scout, learned to survive." Reed shrugged, turning the rabbits over the small flames. "Not much choice. It was that or starve." They ate in companionable silence when the meat was cooked, setting aside portions for Sarah when she woke. The simple meal restored some of Reed's strength, though his knees still throbbed with every movement and fatigue pulled at his eyelids. "You should sleep," Elena said, noticing his struggle to stay alert. "I will keep watch." Reed wanted to protest, to insist he could continue, but the wisdom of her suggestion was undeniable. They faced unknown dangers ahead. Better to face them somewhat rested than completely exhausted. "Wake me in 2 hours," he conceded, finding a relatively comfortable spot against a fallen log. "No longer." Elena nodded, though something in her eyes suggested she might not honor that time limit if she deemed more rest necessary. Reed was too tired to argue the point. Within moments of closing his eyes, he was asleep. His dreams were fragmented, troubled by images of the ambush that had claimed his men's lives. He saw again the flash of rifles in the darkness, heard the screams of wounded soldiers, felt the desperate urgency as he tried and failed to organize a defense. But in the dream, unlike reality, he saw Turner clearly, not fighting the attackers, but directing them, his face illuminated by muzzle flashes as he pointed out targets. Not all the ambushers were Blackfoot, Reed muttered, waking suddenly. Elena was beside him instantly, her hand on his arm. What did you say? Reed sat up, the remnants of the dream still vivid in his mind. The night of the ambush, I always assumed we were attacked by Blackfoot warriors. But thinking back, the attack was too organized, too precise, like someone had told them exactly where we'd be, how many men we had. Turner, Elena guessed. Turner, Reed agreed grimly, and probably other men loyal to Blackwood, disguised as warriors. They didn't want witnesses to whatever they were planning on your father's land, so they eliminated the patrol that might have stumbled across their activities. Sarah had awakened during this exchange, her eyes now focused intently on Reed. The man with two faces, she said quietly. My vision is becoming clear. One face for the world, another hidden in shadow. Reed nodded, understanding now. Turner fits that description perfectly. Maybe Blackwood too. Men who wear the mask of civilization while concealing savagery beneath. Elena's expression had hardened at this analysis. And for this, 8 of your men died, while you were blamed for their deaths. I led the patrol, Reed said, the old guilt surfacing despite his knowledge of Turner's betrayal. I was responsible for their safety. You were betrayed, Elena countered firmly, by men you were taught to trust. The blood is on their hands, not yours. Reed wanted to believe her, but 3 years of carrying the burden of those deaths wasn't easily set aside. Perhaps it never would be, even if the truth about Turner and Blackwood came to light. How far to your father's land? He asked, changing the subject. Perhaps half a day's journey, Elena replied. Less if we move quickly. Reed checked the position of the sun. They had slept longer than the 2 hours he had specified, but he felt better for it. The pain in his knee had subsided to a manageable ache, and some of his strength had returned. Then we should get moving, he decided, rising to his feet. The sooner we reach the lake, the sooner we can put an end to this. They gathered their few possessions and set out once more, following game trails that wound through increasingly familiar terrain for the sisters. Elena took the lead now, her steps sure as she guided them toward her homeland. Sarah walked beside Reed, unusually talkative, as she pointed out plants with medicinal properties or shared stories about landmarks they passed. My grandfather showed me these forests when I was very small, she told Reed as they crossed a stream that tumbled down from the higher elevations. He said that knowing the land was knowing yourself, that the mountains and rivers were written in our blood, just as our ancestors' stories were. Reed found himself drawn in by her quiet wisdom and gentle manner. Where Elena was fierce and direct, Sarah was contemplative, observing the world with the deep perception of someone who saw beyond surface appearances. Your grandfather, Reed said. He was the one who passed the map to you, yes? The one showing the tunnels beneath the lake? Sarah nodded. On his deathbed, he made me memorize every passage, every chamber, before giving me the physical map. Said that paper could be destroyed, but knowledge carried in the heart would endure. Wise man, Reed observed. He was, Sarah agreed, a shadow of sorrow crossing her features. He would have liked you, I think. He respected those who kept their word, even at great cost. The simple assessment touched Reed more deeply than he would have expected. After 3 years of being judged a coward and a traitor, to be seen as honorable, even by proxy through a dead man's imagined approval, felt like a balm to the wound he hadn't realized was still so raw. They continued their journey as the day progressed, the terrain growing steeper as they approached the foothills of the mountains. Reed could see the change in both sisters as they neared their homeland, a subtle straightening of their posture, a lightening in their eyes. Whatever dangers awaited them, they were returning to ground that knew them, land that held their history and identity. It was late afternoon when Elena suddenly stopped, raising her hand in warning. They had been climbing steadily for the past hour, following a narrow trail that wound between massive boulders. Now she pointed silently to a thin column of smoke rising from beyond the next ridge. "The village?" Reed asked in a hushed voice. Elena shook her head, worry creasing her brow. "Too small, and in the wrong place. Our village lies closer to the lake, in the shelter of the eastern slopes." They approached cautiously, using the boulders for cover as they made their way to a vantage point overlooking the source of the smoke. What they saw confirmed Elena's suspicion. Not their village, but a small camp consisting of several canvas tents in a central fire. Men moved about the camp, most dressed in the rough clothing of frontiersmen, but a few in the unmistakable attire of former soldiers. "Blackwood's men," Reed murmured, counting at least 8 figures in the camp. "They've established a base close to the lake." Elena's expression had darkened with anger. "They are on our land without permission, defiling sacred ground." Reed studied the camp's layout, noting the positions of sentries and the stacks of equipment that suggested a semi-permanent operation. "They're searching for the tunnel entrance," he guessed, "the one your father collapsed." "And they have not found it," Sarah observed, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Or they would not still be here." Reed continued his assessment, his scout's training automatically cataloging details, the number of weapons visible, the patterns of movement that indicated a routine, the general alertness, or lack thereof, of the men. What he saw gave him hope. These weren't Turner's disciplined hunters, but a work crew, focused more on their search than on security. "If we wait until dark," Reed said, "we might be able to slip past them, reach the lake undetected." Elena shook her head firmly. "No, this ends now. They have no right to be here, to desecrate our land." Her hand moved to the revolver at her waist. "We should confront them." Reed caught her arm gently but firmly. 3 against 8, Elena. Those aren't odds I like, especially when we're down to a few bullets between us." "Then what do you suggest?" she demanded, though she made no further move toward the camp. Reed considered their options. Direct confrontation was too risky, but allowing Blackwood's men to continue their search unchallenged wasn't acceptable either. They needed to disrupt the operation without exposing themselves to unnecessary danger. "We create a distraction," he decided, "something to draw them away from the lake, give us time to find the tunnel entrance ourselves." "What kind of distraction?" Sarah asked. Reed's gaze had fixed on the supply tent at the edge of the camp, where several barrels were visible. "Fire," he said simply. "Not close enough to harm anyone, but enough to create chaos, force them to focus on saving their supplies rather than continuing their search." Elena studied the camp, then nodded slowly. "It could work, but we would need to move quickly once they're distracted." "That's the plan," Reed agreed. "I'll set the fire. You two circle around to the lake, start looking for the tunnel entrance. I'll join you as soon as I can." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Together, remember? That was our agreement." "This isn't about sacrificing myself," Reed assured him. "It's about efficiency. You know the lake, the likely locations of the entrance. I don't. It makes sense for you to start the search while I create the diversion." Elena clearly wasn't entirely convinced, but she recognized the logic of his argument. "Very well," she conceded. "But if you are not at the lake within half an hour of the fire starting, I'm coming back for you." The fierce protectiveness in her tone caught Reed off guard. In the chaos of their flight, he hadn't fully registered how their relationship had evolved. From reluctant traveling companions to something deeper. A bond forged through shared danger and mutual respect. "I'll be there," he promised. "Now, let's work out the details." They spent the next hour observing the camp, noting the routines of the men and planning their approach. As dusk fell, the workers began gathering around the central fire for their evening meal, leaving the perimeter less guarded. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. "Remember," Reed said as they prepared to separate, "the goal is distraction, not confrontation. Set the fire, then get to the lake as quickly as possible." Elena nodded, her expression solemn. "Be careful," she said simply. "You too," Reed replied. Then on impulse he added, "The $12 your father paid for me? Best investment he ever made." A rare smile lit Elena's features, transforming her face. "I will tell him you said so, when this is over." With that, they parted ways, the sisters heading toward the lake, while Reed circled toward the supply tent. The gathering darkness provided cover as he moved carefully from boulder to boulder, working his way closer to the camp. The voices of the men carried clearly in the evening air. Their conversation focused on the day's unsuccessful search and complaints about the quality of the food. Reed waited until most of the crew was gathered around the fire before making his final approach. The supply tent stood partially open, its interior dimly lit by a single lantern. He could see barrels of what he assumed was oil for their lamps, along with stacks of provisions and equipment, perfect for his purposes. Moving silently, Reed slipped behind the tent, finding a seam in the canvas that allowed him to reach inside. His fingers closed around the base of the lantern, carefully lifting it from its hook. With deliberate movements, he tipped it slightly, allowing oil to spill onto a stack of empty burlap sacks. Not enough to cause an immediate blaze, but enough that when he finally knocked the lantern over, the flame would catch and spread quickly. He was about to complete this final step when a voice spoke directly behind him. "I figured it would be you, Reed." Reed froze, recognizing the voice instantly. Slowly, he withdrew his hand from the tent and turned to face Lieutenant Nathaniel Turner. The lieutenant stood a few paces away, his pistol leveled steadily at Reed's chest. He looked much as he had at the mining camp, confident, controlled, the very image of military discipline. But there was something new in his eyes now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Lieutenant," Reed acknowledged, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. "Come to finish what you started 3 years ago?" Turner's expression remained impassive. "I've come to end this one way or another." "By killing me, like you killed our men in that ambush?" A flicker of something. Regret? Anger? Crossed Turner's face. "You don't understand what's at stake here, Reed. Never did." "Then enlighten me, Reed suggested, stalling for time as he assessed his options. The rifle was slung across his back, impossible to bring to bear before Turner could fire. His knife was accessible, but a blade against a bullet were poor odds indeed. Turner studied him for a long moment, then did something completely unexpected. He lowered his pistol slightly, not holstering it, but no longer aiming directly at Reed's heart. "Blackwood is coming," Turner said, his voice low and urgent. "Tomorrow at dawn, with enough men to subdue the entire Shoshone settlement if necessary. He's done waiting, done playing games. He wants the gold, and he's prepared to eliminate anyone who stands in his way." Reed's surprise must have shown on his face because Turner gave a humorless laugh. "Didn't expect that, did you? A warning from the enemy?" "Why would you tell me this?" Reed demanded, suspicion coloring his tone. Turner's expression hardened. "Because contrary to what you think, I never wanted those men to die. The ambush was supposed to be a diversion, to separate the patrol from the area where Blackwood's men were searching for the tunnel entrance. No one was supposed to get killed. But they did die," Reed said flatly. 8 good men." "Yes," Turner acknowledged, something like genuine regret crossing his features. "Things went wrong. The warriors Blackwood hired were more interested in counting coup than following orders. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to stop it." "So you let me take the blame," Reed concluded. "Branded me a traitor to save your own skin." "To save the mission," Turner corrected. "Blackwood convinced me that what we were doing was for the good of the territory, for progress. The gold beneath that lake could fund development, bring civilization to the frontier. What were a few acres of Indian land against that vision? And the deaths of 8 soldiers, were they an acceptable price too?" Turner looked away, unable to meet Reed's gaze. "I've asked myself that question every day for 3 years. I still don't have an answer I can live with." The confession hung in the air between them, changing the dynamic in ways Reed hadn't anticipated. Not absolution, nothing could erase the betrayal or bring back the dead, but perhaps a crack in Blackwood's facade, a potential ally where he had expected only an enemy. "So why warn me now?" Reed asked. "Why not just let Blackwood complete what he started?" Turner holstered his pistol in a gesture that seemed both surrender and defiance. "Because I've seen what Blackwood is willing to do for that gold. The women he's had kidnapped and killed. The families he's driven from their land. The lies he's told to men like me, wrapping greed in the flag of progress." He met Reed's gaze directly. "And because you deserve better than what happened to you. You tried to save those men while I was running for my own life. Reed absorbed this, weighing Turner's apparent change of heart against 3 years of bitter enmity. And now? Now you have a choice, Turner said. Take the women and run. I'll give you a head start. Tell Blackwood you escaped northeast toward the Canadian border. Or stay and fight. Try to stop Blackwood before he arrives tomorrow with forces you can't hope to match. It was, Reed realized, essentially the same choice he had been facing since the moment Elena and Sarah had appeared at his campfire. Run or stand, escape or confront, self-preservation or protection of others. There's a third option, Reed said slowly, an idea taking shape. One that gives us a chance against Blackwood, even with his superior numbers. Turner raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. I'm listening. The gold, Reed said simply. That's what Blackwood wants. What if we find it first? Use it as leverage, as evidence of his true motives. You think you can find the tunnel entrance when Blackwood's men have been searching for weeks? Reed smiled thinly. I think the chief's daughters might know exactly where to look. Understanding dawned in Turner's eyes. The map. They have a map of the tunnels. Maybe, Reed said, unwilling to confirm what Turner had already guessed. The question is, are you willing to help us use it? To stand against Blackwood when he arrives? Turner was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his expression. Then he nodded, a decision made. I've lived with the weight of those 8 deaths for 3 years. Maybe it's time I did something to balance the scales. Reed studied the lieutenant, looking for any sign of deception. What he saw instead was a man broken by guilt, seeking some form of redemption. Not unlike Reed himself. If you're playing me, Turner, Reed warned, if this is another betrayal, I swear I'll make you regret it. I've regretted enough for one lifetime, Turner replied quietly. I'm done with betrayal. Reed nodded slowly, accepting the tentative alliance. Then we need to move. Elena and Sarah are already at the lake, searching for the entrance. Together they slipped away from the camp, leaving the unset fire behind. As they moved through the darkening forest toward the lake, Reed found himself in the strangest of positions, trusting the man who had destroyed his life to help him save not only himself but the women who had become unexpectedly precious to him. $12 silver, he thought as they hurried through the gathering night. Walking Bear had paid $12 for Reed's services, but what he had purchased was far more valuable. A chance at justice, at truth, at redemption for everyone involved. Whether that investment would pay off remained to be seen. Dawn and Blackwood were coming all too soon. Whether that investment would pay off remained to be seen. Dawn and Blackwood were coming all too soon. The lake emerged from the darkness like a vision, a perfect oval of still water reflecting the stars above, its surface unbroken by even the slightest ripple, as if time itself stood frozen here. Reed understood now why Walking Bear's people considered this place sacred. There was something otherworldly about its perfect stillness. Elena? Sarah? Reed called softly as they approached the shoreline. Movement caught his eye, a shadow detaching from the deeper darkness beneath a stand of ancient pines. Elena emerged, her revolver raised until she recognized Reed. Her expression hardened when she saw Turner behind him. What is this? She demanded, keeping her weapon trained on the lieutenant. He's with us now, Reed explained quickly, moving between them. Turner wants to help. Elena's eyes narrowed with suspicion. The man who betrayed you? Who hunted us? The man who's trying to make things right, Turner answered for himself. Blackwood betrayed us all, and he's coming at dawn with enough men to overwhelm your entire village. Sarah appeared beside her sister, her dark eyes studying Turner with unsettling intensity. The man with 2 faces, she said quietly. But which face do you wear now, Lieutenant? Turner met her gaze without flinching. The true one, for the first time in 3 years. We don't have time for this, Reed interjected. Sarah, the tunnel entrance. Can you find it? The younger sister nodded, moving toward the lake's edge. Grandfather showed me in dreams. The entrance lies beneath the water, but there is another way. She pointed to a rock formation near the western shore, there where the white stones meet water's edge. They followed her to a jumble of pale limestone boulders half submerged in the lake. Sarah moved with sudden certainty, placing her hands on specific stones, pressing and shifting them in what seemed like a random pattern until something clicked beneath the water. A section of stone slid away, revealing a narrow passage sloping downward into darkness. Blood on white stones, Reed muttered, remembering Sarah's vision. Let's hope that part doesn't come true tonight. Turner produced a small lantern from his pack. Blackwood's men will notice if we're gone too long. We need to move quickly. The tunnel was ancient, its walls carved with symbols Reed couldn't decipher. Water trickled along the floor, and the air grew warmer as they descended deeper beneath the earth. Sarah led the way, moving with the confidence of someone walking a familiar path, despite never having physically been here before. After what felt like an eternity of twisting passages, the tunnel widened into a vast cavern. Turner raised his lantern, and they all froze in astonishment. The ceiling arched high above them, studded with crystal formations that caught and reflected the light. But it was what lay on the cavern floor that stole their breath. Gold, more gold than Reed had ever imagined possible. Coins, artifacts, ceremonial objects from a dozen different tribes, all gathered in this hidden sanctuary. My God, Turner breathed. Blackwood was right about one thing. This would fund his empire for decades. It was never meant to be spent, Sarah said softly. This is the collected treasure of many tribes hidden here during the great wars for safekeeping. It belongs to no one person. It is the heritage of all our peoples. Elena had moved to a stone altar at the center of the cavern. Look at this, she called. They gathered around what appeared to be a tribal record, paintings and carvings documenting the history of the gold and the sacred purpose of the lake above. But among these ancient records were newer additions, papers bearing military seals, maps with Blackwood's own signature, orders authorizing removal of obstacles to claiming the territory. Evidence, Reed said, gathering the papers. Blackwood's own orders authorizing the ambush that killed my men. Turner studied the documents, his face grim, and records of other removals. Families disappeared, witnesses silenced. He's been planning this for years. A distant sound stopped their conversation, voices from above, the splash of water at the tunnel entrance. They found us, Elena whispered. No, Turner corrected, checking his pocket watch. It's dawn. Blackwood has arrived. They hurried back through the tunnels, Turner and Reed carrying as much evidence as they could gather. When they reached the entrance, they paused, listening to the voices outside. I want that tunnel entrance found today. The commanding voice could only belong to Blackwood himself. Those savages are hiding something valuable, and I want it. If Walking Bear won't give up the location, burn the village until he changes his mind. Reed and Turner exchanged glances. What's the plan? Turner whispered. We need to get to high ground, Reed replied. Use the evidence to force Blackwood to confess in front of his men. They emerged cautiously from the tunnel, keeping to the shadows as they assessed the situation. Blackwood had arrived with at least 15 men, too many to confront directly. The general himself stood at the lake's edge, a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. There, Elena pointed to a ridge overlooking the lake. We can reach it without being seen if we circle through those trees. They had just started to move when a shout went up. Sir, movement by the stones! Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up spray from the lake as they ran for cover. Reed returned fire with his rifle, providing cover as the others made for the trees. A bullet grazed his arm, but adrenaline dulled the pain. They had almost reached the tree line when more gunfire erupted, but not aimed at them. From the eastern shore, a group of riders appeared, firing at Blackwood's men. Reed recognized Walking Bear at their head, alongside a white man who could only be Benjamin Miller. Behind them rode a dozen more, a mix of tribal warriors and settlers from the community. Chaos erupted around the lake. Blackwood's men scattered for cover, caught between two forces. Reed seized the moment, climbing to a boulder that gave him a commanding view of the battlefield. Blackwood, he shouted, his voice carrying across the water. It's over. We have your orders, your plans, everything. Your men deserve to know what they're fighting for. He held up the documents, clearly visible in the dawn light. Blackwood turned, his face contorted with rage. Kill him, he ordered, but his men hesitated, confused by the sudden appearance of Walking Bear's force and Reed's proclamations. Turner stepped up beside Reed, his military uniform lending authority to his words. "Stand down, men. General Blackwood ordered the ambush that killed 8 soldiers 3 years ago, our brothers in arms, to hide his search for gold. I was part of it. God help me, but I won't be party to more murder." The fighting stuttered to a halt as confusion spread through Blackwood's ranks. Several lowered their weapons, unwilling to fire on a uniformed officer making such accusations. In the lull, Walking Bear and Miller advanced, weapons raised but not firing. "These lands are under the protection of both my people and the settlement," Walking Bear announced, "by agreement with his territorial governor. Your authority ends here, Blackwood." Blackwood, seeing his control slipping away, drew his pistol and aimed at Reed. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Scout." The shot that rang out didn't come from Blackwood's gun. Turner's pistol smoked as Blackwood fell, clutching his shoulder. The general's weapon dropped to the ground. "For James Miller," Turner said quietly, "and the 7 others whose blood is on both our hands." In the aftermath, as Blackwood's men surrendered and the wounded were tended to, Reed found himself standing with Walking Bear and Elena at the lake's edge. $12, Walking Bear said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "For a horse, the safety of my daughters, and justice long delayed." "You knew," Reed said, "about Turner, about Blackwood. You planned all of this." The chief nodded. "Not all, I hoped. I set things in motion. The rest was up to you and to whatever spirits guide our paths." Benjamin Miller approached, his weathered face solemn. "The territorial judge will be here in a week. He'll want statements from all of you, especially you, Reed. Time to clear your name." "And Turner?" Reed asked. "He'll face consequences," Miller acknowledged, "but his testimony against Blackwood will count in his favor." As preparations were made to transport Blackwood to face justice, Elena drew Reed aside. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with natural ease. "What will you do now?" she asked. "The northern pass is still there, waiting for you to cross." Reed looked out over the lake, thinking of the journey that had begun with a noose around his neck and 12 silver dollars in his pocket. He thought of the path ahead, the freedom he had sought for so long beyond the mountains. Then he looked at Elena, at the strength and grace that had captured something in him he hadn't known was still alive. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've been running long enough. Maybe it's time to find out what standing still feels like." The smile that bloomed on Elena's face was worth more than all the gold beneath the lake, worth more than freedom, worth more than vindication, worth every one of those 12 silver dollars and infinitely more.